This is Ivy Unleashed,
a Gold Ivy production. I love that you just keep unlocking the next thing. There's so many beautiful things you just said.
Yeah, that's like my life, unlocking the next thing.
It really is.
Well, and what I keep hearing you say too is this idea of choices, right? Of what you focus on expands, and you are the creator. Things are happening for you and not to you. And it's that perspective shift of, all right, I can either sit here and be pissed, but how does that feel? Or I can empower myself and say, all these other people are doing something. There's something that I'm missing, that curiosity with yourself of, all right, if someone else has done it, why the hell can't I? What am I missing? Like you said, what do I need to unlock that's going to level me up? And tapping into that feeling is something I keep hearing you say. And so I'm curious how you use that feeling to then change your behavior, because it's all interconnected.
It goes back to the terror, method earlier. When we are feeling something, typically in this case, we're going to start with what we don't enjoy feeling, because if something's good, why break it? So if you're feeling some sort of negative way, or, I don't know, bad way, however you want to label it, just something that's not ideal, then you can, trace it back to your thoughts. What are you thinking? What's the story you're telling yourself? Like, what's the story you're living by? And then you'll be able to see how it's making you feel. And then you can go the next step further, which is what I think more important is, or not more important, equally as important, of how you're behaving in the world, how that emotion is influencing your body to move or to not move. Because it's, we can be inspired to move. That's what emotions do. They drive action, but they also paralyze us in some ways. It just depends on the coping mechanisms we developed at a young age. So, when we can start with the emotion, which is typical where we start, then we can go to the thought, and then we can see how it's, manifesting the emotion. Then we can see how we're influencing our behavior, and then, how that's shaping our reality internally and externally. And that's something I believe our external reality is just mirroring back to us what we believe about ourselves and about the outside world. And then we can also see how the story we're living by, what we believe, our thoughts, is similar to a story, is, playing that out and manifesting, which is, something I mentioned, or I meant to mention earlier. A belief of mine, one of my three main talking points when I'm on stage, is our reality is a manifestation of our choices. So we can choose the story we live by. We can choose to change that story. We can also choose all these different other aspects of being a human being and how they impact us internally and externally.
I love this idea of this new perspective, right? Like with your choices. And I think what's powerful is like what you've been through as an example inspires people. And then you explaining that you have this power, right? But how do you, like, as a coach or as a speaker, help people take that for themselves? Like there's that point, right? Like you had it, you were like, why me? Why me? And then it was, I'm doing something about this.
It's like you hit your rock bottom, but how do you inspire people who they haven't gone through something as serious as you? When you don't feel good, when you're at that point, you're like, all right, something has to change if I want to feel different. Mm-hmm. So yeah, like, how do you inspire people who haven't necessarily hit the rock bottom yet?
I think it's through the power of storytelling, so that's another thing too. Like we tell ourselves these stories of like, oh, well, I haven't gone through that. My shit's not as bad. And I don't know how to relate to what you've gone through. Similar, you don't know how to relate to what I've gone through. And that's something I've learned about traumatic experiences and just experiences in general. Like there's no comparing one to the other, because we're all different human beings. We all have a different biopsychosocial social makeup of who we are. So to label or to judge one experience of a human to the other doesn't make sense. I did that with Lance Armstrong and it inspired me, but it could have easily, deterred me from believing in myself. And I chose the inspiration. And there's other times where I've, chosen the victim aspect of like seeing this person winning and then being like, like I'm, comparing it to where I am. And I'm like in a moment of suffering or survival mode. And I'm like, oh man, this sucks. Like, so it's just about relating that we're all human and that one situation isn't better or worse than the other, because equally to that person, it's just as, severe. And that's like the people will talk about, oh, like, yeah, it's easy to say you got all this money. Like it's like people that even are wealthy, like have problems, like their problems equally weigh on them physically, emotionally, and spiritually and mentally. There's no comparison to another human being that's not you. So I think that's the first thing, is letting people understand, like, and allowing them permission to understand, like, You don't have to keep judging yourself and comparing and contrasting with me. I'm here to inspire you of what's possible if you don't take in consideration your health internally and externally. That's how I use my stories, to inspire people what's possible, but also inspire them what's possible, bad and good, but also lead them into being inspired to be proactive before it gets to a point of maybe you have to take radical change, or maybe it's too late, or whatever it may be. And that's the first part, is just like, there's no comparison. Your stuff is equally weighing on you as my stuff weighs on me. And then I think after that, it goes to inspiring, let's be proactive rather than reactive, because sometimes being reactive is too late. I've been fortunate enough to be where I am today, performing to my best of my abilities at this level, because I had something that I was fortunate enough to react to and overcome, and then be proactive, to where I talked about that graph earlier, the top coordinates of first diagnosis down to the 6th or 7th diagnosis, whatever I'm at now. It's just the severity has gone down, but the bottom point of ignorance is to conscious empowerment. It's gone up. So there's a direct correlation there. Obviously, correlation isn't causation, but that's the other piece. It's like, stop telling yourself, you can choose to stop telling yourself these stories and making up stories about why you're not able to succeed. And your, cognitive bias tell you these stories to rationalize and justify where you are and why it's not possible, when that's just resistance to change. And when you can become aware of that, then you can actually have a chance and a higher probability of creating the change you want. And how that looks, like 30-foot POV of how I work with my clients, is in 4 different layers. It's the layer of auditing, understanding the autobiography of that person to that point. And then the mindset layer of getting to understand their story, their code, like who they are, their programming, and how they view the world, how they view themselves, their self-talk, the stories they make up, and all the things that have impacted their internal psychology, who makes them up, all the different elements of their personality, and how that's shaping their personal reality, which moves into the 3rd layer of the foundation, which is physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And just getting these different coordinates to then, in the foundation piece, we can start laying down the foundation with physical, whether it be nutrition, exercise, sleep, so on and so forth, and the mental, emotional, and spiritual, just getting deeper and deeper into the program of who we are, and then start shifting it towards a specific, desirable, ideal outcome for our lives that we're not yet experiencing, whether it be to change our experience, to create something, to bring something to the world, to do whatever it is, internally, externally, or maybe both. That allows us to lay down that foundation, then to go to the next level, which is the optimized level, which is never going to be a destination. It's just going to be this continuation of being more and more conscious of all these different tools that we can harness and, put in our tool belt, so to speak, to become the best version of ourselves. And that's not to say, I get a lot of lashback when I start talking about, empowerment and this and that, and of like these radical extreme ideas of these situations, the hypotheticals. And I'm like, it's not to say being at cause rather than being at effect for reality means nothing bad's ever going to happen. That's a delusional thought that's not attached to reality. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, by doing all these things, from my personal experience as well as my professional experience with clients and friends and family that have adopted these things, it's not to say these things in life won't happen. They very much will happen. There's always going to be some sort of adversity that's going to come in our lives. What this work does is allows us to process it and get back to neutral, to examine what's going on emotionally and get back to neutral and make the most congruent decision moving forward that's going to be most aligned with our desired outcome, and handle that stress. That's the most important part. It's not going to avoid shit from happening. It's going to put us in a place of empowered state of being to handle the stress, internalize it, resolve it, and move forward in a way that's going to lessen the time that we are experiencing the negative aspects of it, and also the potential for declined health and injuries and so on and so forth, rather than going through that storm for a year or so and not knowing why. It's going to equip you to understand how you're responding to situations or reacting to situations, and put you in the driver's seat of how you want to move forward. Here's what's happening. We can't avoid that. Like, life happens. Like, this isn't to say that you can control life. This is to say that you can, to a degree, control how you respond. And then that's going to shorten or increase the time and the probability of you overcoming whatever it is you're faced with.
The driver's seat. That's what I was going to say, is what I'm hearing you say. So I love that you mentioned that, because as you're speaking, I'm thinking, okay, offense versus defense. And that's something, it's a theme that Andrew and I keep coming up with and talking about too, is just carving out this time to do the reflective work, to audit your life, your beliefs, your stories. It gives you this sense of control over your day, your life. And then you talk about, manifesting in your reality, is how powerful but how true it is that it starts with the mind. There's a reason that when you're working with your clients, you start with the stories, you start with the mind. So I love that you brought that in, because that's something that anyone can relate to. Whether you want to change the way you eat, whether you have a life-threatening diagnosis, like you got to look inward first at the story that you're telling yourself.
Yeah. And I think too, you have firsthand experience. You even mentioned a little something earlier about being addicted to stress or something like that. You weave that in and I'm like, ooh, I wonder what stories he used to tell himself. And so I feel like you have so much credibility with what you've been through and like your previous experience with this to get to where you're at. So what was that like before? Like, how did you handle stress before compared to where you're at now? And like that duration of time you suffered or allowed yourself to suffer in it?
It was just a lot of autopilot and just not knowing what was going on and not knowing why when things were calm, I felt uneasy and I was self-sabotaging myself by, if I had downtime, I was like, I'm not doing enough. I need to be doing something more. And then especially leaving BMX to, create an online business, essentially, I was like, man, like I'm not doing anything with my body. Like I identify with doing physically so much for, starting at a young age of sports and getting into landscaping and then becoming a professional athlete, identify with the doing. And I wasn't being. And every time I was being, I felt stressed out, ironically, because I wasn't doing. So I was creating all these self-sabotaging feedback loops to tell myself or to affirm to myself the story of like, I need to be doing to be successful. And that was just holding me back. And that's honestly one of the reasons, one of the few important reasons why I decided to step away from my bike altogether, which, like I said, January 2023 would be 3 years since I've touched my bike, was because I identified every time I get into this position of stress or, adversity with the business, I go back on my bike and I just, avoid this. It's like a coping mechanism. And so I was like, let's take this away and let's sit with my shit. Like, let's see what comes up and let's be able to handle it, not avoid it, which the more we avoid stuff, it just keeps becoming present again. So it was a lot of that. And something earlier that I wanted to say that speaks to this as well. I forget the exact quote. We don't choose our destiny. We choose our habits. Our habits choose our destiny or create our destiny, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was so beautiful because I was like, man, like, yeah, like so many people think that like we have to like, we're destined for this and, we just sit back and, whatever happens. And it's like, no, like, and I think I got this from James Clear in Atomic Habits. It's like the more we become conscious of who we are and the programs and the stories that we're running and telling ourselves, the more we can audit and shift those. And then by acting on those, the habits we're choosing to form and to live by, that's creating evidence of who we believe we are. And that's going to bounce back and forth to the external reality. And as we internally shift who we are, our external reality is going to shift who we are. What is that saying? When you change the way you look at the world changes, something like that. And so I just love that quote. We don't choose our destiny. We choose our habits. Our habits creates our destiny or something like that. And I was just like, man, like if I would sum up my life, like that's what I've been learning the last 13 years.
Yeah. So I'm curious what story you're telling yourself now. It was that you couldn't handle the stress and that you didn't want to avoid it. And so now that you're forcing yourself to sit with it, like what do those stories look like now?
Yeah, I think the simplest way I can summarize it is 2 words, and I will. Whatever it is, like that's the story I try to live by, is like, I will accomplish this. I will create this. I will overcome this. And, it used to be, like I said, it started with the, what if I wake up from surgery the first time, to what will I do when I wake up? So I think that's the best way. I mean, there's so many different avenues we can go down with different aspects of life, but I think at the end of the day, if we can change the story to I will, or even start with what would it take? What would it take to do X, Y, or Z? That creates such a different narrative, that creates such a profound, different emotional experience that inspires such different action. And yeah, I mean, it's just the story I'm telling myself is I will find a way.
Yeah.
Is it tattooed on your arm yet?
Maybe that'll have to be the next one. But yeah, I mean, that's what I did with BMX, and I apply that same mentality to what I'm doing today with my business and, my someday goal of creating a nonprofit and all these different other things. And what I learned from BMX was I didn't have the stories of limitation. I was, thankfully a young age and didn't have much life experience, that I was just determined to make it happen. And I just kept asking myself, what do I need to do? What can I do? What would it take to make this happen? And now that's kind of what I've gone all in, not kind of, that's literally what I've gone all in on is, I will find a way. I will make this happen. I will overcome this. And the question I ask is, even when I get frustrated, I'm like, fuck this isn't working, whatever. It's like, okay, what would it take? Like, what do I need to do differently? What do I need to undo? What do I need to learn? And so I think that, summarizing those two words, I will, fill in the blank. There you go.
Yeah. That's funny because, we always say you want a better life, ask yourself better questions, because just to nerd out about the brain again, our brain's job is to answer the questions that we ask it, right? So if you're asking shitty questions, you're going to get shitty answers. Like, why am I so broke? Well, here. Or what will it take? And then the creative juices start flowing because that's the job's brain.
The brain's job.
Yeah, there is no such thing as a stupid question, but there is a shitty quality of question. So if you can start with asking shitty questions, then you can work on flexing that question muscle to get to better quality questions that'll yield better answers.
I love that. Yeah. And with the I will, for me in my healing journey, it was I can, I will, I am. So it was giving myself the evidence. So I love that you mentioned that too. Clearly, you have done a lot of work and you are helping people all over the world. I'm curious where people can find you, because I'm sure people listening right now are like, all right, give me some more. So where can our listeners find you, Josh?
Yeah. And I appreciate those words, and I appreciate the time we've had to share today. And I know we connected through a mutual friend, Alan Stein, who really been a model of success for me in various different ways. So I appreciate him as well for indirectly connecting us. But yeah, I think the best way people can find me and connect with me is, my website, joshperrybmx.com. That you can find my YouTube channel, my podcast, and then after that, LinkedIn and Instagram. I'm all over the socials, but it's just all at Josh Perry BMX. But the website's just like a one-stop shop. If you want to connect, send me a message there, or I'm most active these days on LinkedIn. So that's it. Say those are the places.
I usually never say this, but I feel like the number one place to go to start to follow you is your website. Usually I'm like, just go to Instagram and it links from there. But your website, like your video when you land on your page, is the most inspiring thing I've ever seen. I was like crying and I was messaging Brooke. I'm like, we have to talk to this guy. Your story, and like, obviously you just went through it and your words are so beautiful. I'm just beyond grateful that you're a part of our platform, because what you're saying is unbelievably inspiring, and it's choking me up because I'm thinking of this video where you see your fall and you hear your words moving from there to where you are now in such a visual way. Your video is so powerful, and I think sometimes we need that. We need to see tragedy. We need to hear about tragedy. You have been through so much, and the way that you have taken these doors and kicked them down and then found the next piece of information that gets you to the next place. Like, it's beautiful. And you're sharing it. I think that is crucial. A crucial piece to this puzzle is that you are allowing us in to see how dark it's been, how you're finding the light. And so I'm just so grateful for what you're creating, because it is like, we're going to have to keep checking in with you too, because you just keep finding the next thing and learning more and more. And so thank you for sharing what you've shared. It's absolutely beautiful.
I appreciate that. And I have to give credit to my friend, Brian Gilmet, for the videos and the website. He's done a fantastic job with that. And he's just a good friend of mine and knows a lot about me, and what he probably knows more about me than anyone besides my fiance, to be honest. And so knowing just a lot of the depths of my work and my mindset and my story and just what I'm trying to bring to the world, he's been able to help me create all the content you see on my website, and most of the professionally done content that wasn't from another person or company that contributed to me. It's all been, from Brian. And so definitely got to thank him.
Shout out, Brian. Nice work. It's amazing.
But yeah, that means the world to me, because I never fathomed nor desired to be in this position I am today of, having a public voice, and ironically not feeling I had a voice most of my childhood for various different reasons we didn't really talk about today. It's interesting to see where I am, that people start with BMX wanted to know about me and my life and my mindset, and then to be where I am today, consciously and intentionally acting on that and being on stages and on podcasts and creating videos and, writing a book will 3 books, like things like that. Like I never wanted to be here nor fathomed being here, but I'm very thankful to be here. And I don't take that lightly. And, having both of you share the kind words of love and support you have, it means a lot to me. So thank you for that. And also thank you to Brian for helping me in the video form share my thoughts.
Yeah. And going back to Alan Stein Jr., shout out Alan, he talks about the unseen hours, which is proof of all of the work you've put in, right? You are this light, you are shining, you are helping people, but you are doing the work it takes to be able to help people at the level that you are. So I know a lot of people don't see the work that goes into it, and you're sharing a little glimpse of it. And so we appreciate that work that you're doing to inspire and to help. And you referenced your book. So people need to follow you so that they can be updated on when this book comes out. So share with us a little about the books that are coming, what we can expect from you moving forward.
Yeah. So when I first came to my friend and editor with 100,000+ words, he was like, dude, you wrote enough for like 2.5 books. So we're going to break this up. So the tentative idea with it, the first 2, is taking my tattoo that says "Fears is a Thought." There we go. That'll be the first one. And it's going to be a straightforward storytelling, just what I've been through up to going to awake brain surgery. They'll kind of end with, going into the awake brain surgery. The second book will be Thoughts Can Be Changed, the second half of my tattoo. And it'll be partial storytelling, but also all the learnings and integration that I took from the last, at that point, 11 years going into the awake brain surgery, and how all that allowed me to feel excited, confident, even though the fears and the worries and the stresses were there, but how it allowed me to move through that process in a way, and also what I came out with. And then the third book, we haven't defined what that'll look like. We're just focused on, more importantly, the first one and then the second one, because those have already been written. We just broke them apart. First one, Fears is a Thought, the story. Thoughts Can Be Changed. The second one, storytelling and information application integration that other people can learn from and just kind of see how it played out in my life. And I think the third book will be my first of maybe a couple to come, but more of like my framework that continues to evolve, that I use for coaching and speaking and things like that. But just one of those guides that will have the story, but also more importantly, give people the roadmap and equip them with the tools and the resources to better themselves in the various different aspects that they wish to do.
Oh, I can't wait to read them, because that's like what you always want. You want the story. Mm-hmm. You want to like hear the integration, right?
And how they did it.
Yes. Yeah. And then you have the framework for yourself. That's brilliant. I cannot wait.
Such a cool way.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back on and talk about it.
Yeah. Do you have a date of a release date yet, or?
Not yet. No. It's such a process that takes a lot of resources, and so not sure. We're halfway through the editing process, and so trying to do my best. But I'll definitely keep everyone posted.
Well, congratulations already. We'll be your girls to help promote, because we love a good book.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I have so much respect for people that have written like educational books that have to cite things and all that. Like, I'm just telling my stories. I don't need to cite things. I just can reference things of different videos they can go watch or things like that. But just to do what we've done with just storytelling, it's quite a process. So people that have written books with, having to cite studies or research or things like that, I can't imagine. So a lot of respect to anyone that's written any form of a book.
Again, we will have you back on when it is released, because we need everyone to know about it. We're so excited for you. And so let's leave our listeners with your 3 gold stars to wrap it up. Do you have your 3 gold stars, Josh?
I think it'd be kind of repeating some of the things from earlier. Being at cause rather than being at effect. I think that's the number one. And then, what we focus on expands, really understanding that concept and how it plays out in your life. And then all that leading into, our realities and manifestation of our choices. And so I think all 3 of those can go any direction you want with any aspect of your life that you want, but really gets at the root of becoming aware of who you are and the life you've created and where you want to take that life.
Oh my gosh. Yes. And people, if they haven't listened to the episode yet, they're going to see those 3 gold stars on Instagram, and they're going to be like, I want to hear more about this, like which you beautifully went through in this episode. So thank you. I love all 3 of those so much. And next up is Unleashing Ivy. Ivy grows in hard places. You've had lots of experience with that. So these are your 3 surprise questions. I hate taking you back here because I know, like you said, like you're at this place now where you're pushing yourself up and trying not to think of these self-limiting beliefs, but we all have them. And I'm curious, what's your like most brutal self-limiting belief right now that you have to like consistently work through?
I'm not enough. I think that's one that's been in the making for quite a bit of time, that keeps revealing itself in various different ways. So that I'm not enough living belief, that's a tricky one.
Yeah. How do you see that? How do you see that show up? Like where do you see that that's still happening?
So I used to see it a lot in terms of external education and learnings and just like trying to absorb everything, because I was like, I don't know enough, like people aren't going to take me for, take me for real if I don't have these letters after my name, and especially being a high school dropout and all this stuff. So that's where I used to see it. I still see that side of me, emerge every now and then, but I'm aware of it now. So I'm like, oh, the old patterns are returning, and it was a good thing because I'm growing and I can recognize them. So then I'm like, all right, well, let's not do that.
How do you show yourself proof that you are enough?
Just by these conversations, having these conversations, working with my clients, and just, finding different ways to interact with people and develop those conversations and relationships, and just to continue to put myself out there, and, people gravitate towards it. And
yeah, you definitely don't sound like a high school dropout. You used a word earlier that was probably like 42 letters long. It was like
neuroimmune endocrinology. Yeah.
That one.
Yes, you're brilliant.
Well, thank you.
Okay, my question. You are always finding new things, new ways. Immunoendocrinology, the word you just said. So I'm curious, what are you like most excited about that you're learning right now that's new to you?
So that's trauma work. The book, The Body Keeps a Score, I think is a great foundation to that. And then I'm currently reading Dr. Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal. But just trauma work in the central nervous system, and how the central nervous system keeps hold of trauma that we can't recall, but the body always remembers. And the difference between remembering and recalling, because a lot of our trauma trapped in the central nervous system comes from pre-verbal times, whether in utero as a baby or infant, whatever. So that's what I've been diving into. And then that also goes and explores different levels of addiction and, psychedelics and therapy and things like that. So, that's where the whole neuroimmune endocrinology concept comes from, of just like trauma being trapped in our central nervous system. And although we can't recall, which is verbal, or our central nervous system remembers, and it just gets stored in our body in various different forms, which, for me is different than other people, of course. But that's like what I've been, I guess I do dare say, obsessed with learning lately. Yeah. And it's very empowering. It's also frustrating, but it's empowering, because then I'm like, oh, here's a path that I can take, and, light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, and some resolution that can come from it.
That research is so fascinating. Like, how are they figuring this out?
Mm-hmm. And here's my question with that too, is you read a lot of books. Like, you've probably referenced a handful of books, and even offline, what we talk about, you're constantly giving recommendations. How do you retain all this information?
So that's something about active learning. Mm-hmm. Is when I read something, I have to reread it, or I rewrite it. Essentially, I never really understood the proper way of taking notes. So I write notes how it makes sense to me. But then just having conversations, teaching other people, anytime you're consuming something and then getting it out in written or verbal form, or teaching it, you're reteaching it to yourself. So it just embeds it, as well as, the unconscious mind stores everything. So the more we can trust that, as well as be active in our learning. And, people talk about active listening, but active learning, I think, is just as, if not more important than active listening. There's different modalities for that. And I find that writing, and then speaking, and then creating content, and, those types of things, it embeds it and like reaffirms the learning. So that way I can, bring it up later on and understand what I'm talking about. Because a lot of things, we get excited and we're like, I say this all the time. I'm like, I don't know how to regurgitate what I just consumed, but I'm like really excited about it because it made sense. But like, I just give me some time. Let me go through it again and again and like take notes. And so I think it's just really comes down to like being active with your learning in the different forms that make sense. But also I reread things a lot and I look up YouTube videos, listen to podcasts from the authors. So I'm really active in my learning experience, and that's just what works for me. So I think it just comes down to like understanding what works for you and trying different things and just taking note of what works. But I think generally speaking, active learning is at the core of it.
Yeah, we curated a business through that. We're like, we're listening to the podcast, we're reading the books. Why don't we share it? So we both journal about it and write about what we're learning. We share it on TikTok. We talk about it on the podcast. So a lot of times off air, Brooke was saying like, sometimes I feel like I'm saying these things, but I don't know if it sounds right. I'm like, that was beautiful. I just learned
just talking about
I just learned so much from what you just said. And so we, and then we show people how we implement these things. And so
storytelling, that's another way. Cause everyone, musicians say this a lot, like people interpret music in their own way that maybe the musician or the artist didn't mean for it because they were talking about their life experiences, but people will internalize it in their own way and then bring a new meaning to the table. And, the artist will be like, oh, like I never saw that. I mean, I've done that with my talks before. I asked people like, what was your main takeaway? And there was an event before the pandemic, 3 people shared the same takeaway as each other that I'd never even realized about my own life. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. I just never saw that.
What was it?
So I asked them and they were like, yeah, I think my main takeaway was like not going after your dreams could kill you. Because I was taught, part of my story is, pursuing BMX, hitting my head that thankfully, saved my life. And I was like, damn, 3 of you just said that. And I've never heard that nor seen that. But now that you say that, that makes sense looking back. And now I can, use that information moving forward in a different storytelling form. So I think it's active learning, which storytelling is a part of that. But, you learn something and then you can attach a different experience you've gone through in a sense of sharing a story with that learning embedded in it. I think that's what, as human beings, we try to make things, or we don't try, we just make things super complex, even though they're pretty simple. And so when you can tell a story that gets to the root of the point you're making with whatever information you just learned, that's going to come across better to the other person that doesn't really know what you're talking about. But because you attached an experience in a storytelling manner, they're like, oh, that makes sense. And then they'll internalize it themselves in their own way. And then the material will, be shared, but they don't know the specificity in the complex, topic per se, but the story, they're like, I can relate to that. I mean, that's what Simon Sinek's work is about, the golden circle of like why, and starting with your why that's so important with a storytelling element of like, our mammalian brain, our reptile brain, and our emotions, limbic system, and how all that just like internalizes and like a story makes sense. We've been doing that for centuries, but to like regurgitate the technical lingo that many people aren't even gonna understand, that was a limiting belief I had of like not being good enough or not being enough. And I was like, no, I can simplify this. And I have a client who's a therapist, and I, shared the other day with them that, I don't want to be disrespectful by simplifying this thing, but like what I'm talking about comes from the psychology world. And they said like, no, like, thank you, because that's, I think a problem with a lot of this information. It's just so difficult to understand that when you can reinvent, not like, or re-engineer the process or simplify things with storytelling and things like that, people can actually understand it and comprehend it, and then, make use of it, what they will, in a productive manner. So active learning and storytelling, those are great ways to reaffirm and re-embed the learnings ourselves.
Yeah. And you never know who's going to resonate with your story, which I think is why it's so important to share your story, because it is going to reach the people who need to hear it, who, yes, you may know the same thing as, someone else, but they may not relate to that person, but they relate to you and your message and your experience. And that's something that I've really had to get confident with, is I am me, and that's what makes me different. And I do have a story to tell, and that's what makes it digestible, like you're saying.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
All right, last question.
All right, Josh, what is one thing you wish you would have known sooner?
Nothing, because where I am today could be different. And I, although intrigued and curious of where I could be that'd be different, I wouldn't want to change that, because I don't know what could be better or worse.
That's my favorite answer. Whenever people say it, I'm like, I knew you were going to say that.
But it takes doing a lot of internal work to get there. You always know people that have been like had a lot of reflection to get to that point where you just know where I am is where I'm meant to be. And
To be clear, there are times where I'm like, damn, if I had known this, that would have changed that whole path. And I entertain those. I'm human. But, coming back and being present in the moment, it's, my ego wants to say, oh yeah, like I would love to have changed all this. But then I'm like, oh, I don't know if I'd be here where I am today. And that's part of attachment, the ego and the brain and being human. But I'm like, I love my fiance. I love my life. I'm alive. Like, I don't wish anything would be different because I don't know what could be different on the other end or if I even be here right now. So, yeah, there is a lot of work that goes into that. Cause 10 years ago, I would have been like, oh, I wish this and that. But, I think it's like the movie, The Butterfly Effect. Like, just like you change one little thing. What about all this, the rest that's going to follow suit after? So
those what ifs, those are what drive you crazy and add to the stress, which we don't need. So,
all right. And the last thing we do is we leave our listeners with a piece of gold, a quote that speaks to you.
If I were to share something, it's just, I think most importantly, it's just become aware of who you are, what you're thinking, what you're doing, and if it's serving you or not. And just ask yourself, what would it take to change? What would it take to change this, that, or myself, most importantly, and really understand that your inner world is just mirrored back to you in the external reality. And it's not going to change overnight, but the more intention and conscious repetition you put into things, the higher probability that you'll get to your ideal outcome sooner than later. And there's a lot of positive experiences that come from doing that and pursuing that path. And you may learn a couple of things along the way about yourself. You may find some new interests and some new passions. And that's kind of how it worked out for me, or not kind of, it's exactly how it worked out for me.
This is Gold Ivy signing off.
Listen to your truth and go chase your gold.